Back to Access Tech Live.
And we're back on Access Tech Live. Stephen Scott and Mark Aflalo with you here. Now, May is Vision Health Month. And Mark, you were at the Canadian Council for the Blind's Vision Health Month conference in Ottawa this week, right?
I was, and it was really interesting, Stephen. A lot of fascinating presenters like Jutta Treviranus. She's a director and professor at the Inclusive Design Research Center, and she's joining us now. Welcome to the show, Jutta.
Thank you, both Mark and Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Jutta. Tell us, how did you first become interested and involved in AI, and more specifically, advancing accessibility with it?
Well, my first foray into AI was actually in the 80s, so quite a number of decades ago, and I was working with children who relied on augmentative and alternative communication because their speech was not understandable. And I used AI to recognize their repeatable utterances so that they could communicate and control things with their voice, even though people didn't generally understand what they were saying.
That's super interesting, especially because when people say the word AI, they don't really think about going that far back. But we all know, especially in the tech space, that AI has been used in many, many cases. In that period of time, since the 80s is, in my mind, a long time ago, what are the most significant changes that you've seen in the technology, other than obviously it becoming a little bit more commercial?
Well, AI is basically still a statistical reasoning machine. It's like a power tool that does statistics on steroids, I guess. And the changes are how much data we feed AI and how much power we give the machine, both in terms of the resources that are there and the control that we hand over to the machine.
Now, in your presentation at the Vision Health Month conference, you mentioned 3 generations of AI. So let's maybe talk through this in a bit more detail. How has each generation, and I also just want to say at this point, guys, the 80s wasn't that far away. I'm starting to feel very old today. But anyway, each generation, how has it changed? How has it improved? How has it impacted on people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I do characterize AI as being in 3 generations, and it's an oversimplification, but I want to emphasize that we, people, are shaping AI. And in the first generation, we said, here are the rules, follow them literally and accurately. And from that, you get all these funny stories about robots and AI doing things very literally and therefore not actually the way we intended. In the second generation, we said, here's selected available data, use statistical reasoning to optimize towards these metrics or these measures and values that we want. And that's a very pervasively deployed form of AI. It's actually making a huge number of critical decisions about our lives and that affect our lives. It's in almost every form of decision-making that we have. And then people became aware of AI with the much hyped third generation. And there what we said is, here's all the data we have, you figure it out, and make new connections and determine weights based on past relationships and possible combinations. And we've also said, make it believable, make it feel like it is coming from a human. But that actually doesn't mean that it will be truthful, because the AI doesn't know what is truth or what is not truth. It's basically continuing that statistical reasoning and say, here in my data, this is the next predictable statistical answer or outcome. And statistical reasoning, unfortunately, as a means of making decisions does harm. Assuming it does harm to the outliers, and assuming what we know about the majority applies to the minority does harm. And my greatest concern is when AI is specifically used to find, match, sort, label, measure, optimize, calculate, and analyze people at scale.
Yeah, and that brings me to, something you brought up in your conversation with the Vision Health Month at the conference. You talked about the vulnerability of people with disabilities to those errors and to those things in AI. Have you seen incidents where AI systems have failed to meet the needs of people with disabilities?
Oh, definitely. Um, One of the things to understand about people with disabilities is people with disabilities are different from average. And that means, one illustration I use to talk about the implications of that is what I call a human starburst, where the statistical center is occupied by the majority of people, but at the outer edges of the data distribution are people with disabilities. And so in everything we design, the design tends to work if you're in that central average, but it becomes difficult to use or impossible to use as you move away from the statistical mean or the center of that starburst. And the same thing happens with AI. Everything it determines is highly accurate for the middle, but as you move away from the middle, it becomes inaccurate and then wrong. And so I've been experiencing, or I've sort of labeled this last decade as my "I told you so" decade, unfortunately. We've been monitoring harm and incident databases, and we find parents with disabilities falsely flagged as unfit, false positive tax audits, false positive security flagging, disabled applicants excluded at a much greater rate from filtering in employment and competitive academic admissions, biased credit and asset rating, unfairly denied mortgages and loans, unfairly high insurance rates, deprioritization of relevant information in our media and in any of the information that is made available publicly, and even iatrogenic death and illness. And that means death and illness from the treatment, not from the disease, because AI is used to choose the treatment that works for the average patient. AI is basically amplifying a lot of the discrimination that's happening in the past. And as AI gets more accurate, consistent, and efficient, it is becoming more consistently, efficiently discriminatory. And as long as it's using statistical reasoning, because people with disabilities tend to be different from the statistical mean or the average, it is biased against those individuals that are outliers. And so it, unfortunately, both for people with disabilities, but for the population as a whole, it's a form of almost digital eugenics. It's removing in our speech, in the things we produce, in the way that we hire, in the way that we educate, in all of those things, it's getting rid of that diversity and moving towards this notion or the statistical average and creating a monoculture. It's homogenizing everything we're doing.
I mean, this is incredible to hear what you're talking about. I mean, I think this is probably the first time I've heard this be talked about in a public forum in this way. I think this is fascinating, and clearly that talk has resonated with many people. I want to ask you just one question, though, about the vulnerability side on a personal level, because there are many people out there who are disabled who are lonely, simply lonely, and they see AI as a companion, potentially. Is there a danger there?
It all depends how we use it. I think what we need to question when we use AI, for whatever reason, is why are we using AI, and we need to understand how it is coming up with the statements, the production. So AI as a potential companion, we need to understand what it has learned. And so AI offers extreme benefits to people with disabilities. It is an amazing translation machine, and it can be very life-changing. But even there, if you are unlike the pool of people it's made for, then you are least likely to benefit from it. And AI also, we have to understand that it isn't actually human, that it's designed to become believable, but it is frequently hallucinating. And when we look at the content that AI produces, think about the polluted pool of information about people with disabilities that comes from. I mean, think about all of the information on the web or within the public domain about people with disabilities. It tends to be ableist slurs, jokes, characterization of people with disabilities as pitiable or suffering, etc. All of those fairly horrible tropes, but also, or it is inspiration, or what we call inspiration porn. Excuse the term, where we are giving this very unrealistic picture about people with disabilities. So that will be the basis of what the companion that you're choosing is basing its responses from. We need to be very careful that in its application.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, this is an example of a time where I wish our show was 2 hours, because I'd love to talk to you for another hour about this topic. But thank you for joining us. We're going to post a link on our social media where people can follow you, and we'll definitely have you on another show to continue this conversation. Coming up, if you could swap lives with a fictional AI robot or character for a day, who would it be and what would you do? The answers to that question after a quick break here on Access Tech Live.
There's more Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.